Hello everyone, welcome to my Last of Us Remake, grounded difficulty, no damage, no crafting, no upgrades, no safes, no Shiv doors walkthrough. This is the final chapter of the game, Salt Lake City, and this chapter isn't as bad as the previous chapters. The only part that I really don't like is the final Firefly sequence where you have all of those enemies patrolling that massive hallway and they're all just staring in one direction. And they made one massive change, and it's a very small thing, but it makes a big difference. And in the remastered version of that sequence, the final two enemies would just be like crouched, just hiding behind cover, and that allowed you to sneak past them by mantling over the cover that they were taking cover behind, and you could get to the door easily. Well, in the remake version, those enemies are standing up and they are actively searching the area while they're still standing still. And it makes a big difference because doing that change alone made stealth physically impossible to do. And when I'm talking about stealth, I mean stealth in the traditional sense where you're not making any noise. But I cannot begin to tell you guys the amount of hours I was spending on that sequence just trying to figure it out stealthily, and it was physically impossible to do until I watched Ether's run, where he did his permadeath run, and he found a good strategy. And when I got to that sequence and I used Ether's strategy for the first time, I got the sequence on the first try. So massive shout out to Ether for coming up with that strategy, because he helped spare me additional hours of pain just trying to figure out that entire section. And I don't like that final part of the Firefly sequence. It is something that goes against the norms of traditional stealth, and you know, they set up the room in a way where it looks like they want you to move from cover to cover, but you can't because of the way they've positioned the enemies, and because of the awareness of the enemies on grounded difficulty, and because of the god tier peripheral vision, and it's just a false stealth encounter. And I'll explain more when we get to that sequence, because I really despise that final part. And even with the strategy Ether found, and with the success in implementing Ether's strategy into this walkthrough, I still don't like that section. It should have been better designed. But this section right here works just as well as the remastered version. In fact, they've made a change here. So in the remastered version, when going along this path right here, there is always a clicker just standing still, just unaware of you. But they've removed that clicker. And also, in the remake version, when Ellie drops that crate, the previous enemies will be alerted to your position, so you gotta get up the crate very quickly. And also, sometimes a runner can see you for a little bit, but he never fully detects me when I'm moving along this path. But I've gotten all the way over here, so now I just need Ellie to drop that crate. I need to get over the crate once it's dropped, and that will be the end of the sequence. And the only other part, aside from the Firefly sequence that we have to do, is the part where you're separated from Ellie and she gets attacked by that clicker, and it's pretty simple. You just use one shotgun shell or some other weapon. And then we move on to the Firefly encounter, which is really what this chapter is all about. And the first part of the sequence, it works pretty well, although I will say the first time you start the sequence, you have to watch the animation of Joel sprinting into the cover. And because the enemies are moving during that whole moment, you're not going to be able to move the exact same way like I will. I mean, Ether managed to do it, but he crouched at a specific moment when he was moving out of the cover. So you got to bear that in mind when you're going through it the first time. But I had to restart the sequence because I messed up, because I was still trying to figure out the sequence. And then I found a shortcut. And I don't know if the shortcut existed in the remastered version, although maybe it did. Maybe I used it in my original walkthrough of The Last of Us Remastered. I'll have to see. But I feel like the shortcut stands out in the remake version for some reason. I don't know why. But you sprint just then to get past this enemy's gaze, and then you need to mantle so that he doesn't see you, and then you need to come over here, take this outer area, and you've gotten past the enemies. They don't know where you are. They're busy staring down those corridors. The original method I was going to use was I was going to use distractions to my advantage, but it was just presenting with mixed results because I didn't know about this shortcut. But thanks to that shortcut, I managed to get through the sequence in a really good way that actually complements the stealth. This is definitely one of the better stealth sequences in the game. And then you need to hide over here so that you avoid these three enemies. Ether hid behind the gurney and it still worked. But I just like hiding behind there. And then we have this guy, so just kill him with your revolver. After we do this, you'll get an overwriting of your encounter chapter save for some reason. On the remastered version, all of this Firefly sequence will be classed as one encounter, but on the remake, they've classed the lower level and the upper level as separate encounters. And like I said before, it took me hours on my original recording, and I just couldn't find anything for this sequence right here because it's just so badly designed. And then Ether showcased his strategy on this permadeath run. I decided to implement his strategy into my walkthrough, and lo and behold, I managed to get it on my first try, and this is what you're seeing right now. So the pathing on the enemies is the same regardless of whether you start the encounter for the very first time or if you restart the encounter. So you've got to really make sure these enemies aren't moving around when they're investigating, because the enemies on this section, they're designed to look down in one direction as they're moving, and this plays a role in their god-tier peripheral vision screwing you. So you see how the second closest enemy is busy patrolling? I'm not talking about this guy right here, I'm talking about the other guy directly ahead of him. If he's busy like going diagonally to get to a window from the gurney, you cannot move until he sets up at the window because he is actively looking at this direction the entire time. And even when it looks like you should be able to get past him, his peripheral vision says otherwise. So you need to wait for this second guy to go to the window and for this first guy to look through the other windows so that you have a path to get to this gurney over here. So right now, this is the pattern you need, and it's always the same. But I cannot move until that guy right there sets up at the window because he's looking in this direction. That guy right there, that was a guy outside. I should have angled the camera away because like I mentioned before, the direction of your camera, it seems to play a role in how the enemies detect you. It's almost like the direction of your camera shifts Joel's hitbox in that direction, and that's why that enemy was spotting me. If I had just stared in the direction of the gurney and not have those enemies in camera view, I probably could have not been seen right there, but I was still able to get away nonetheless. But right now, the guy behind me can't see me. I'm just waiting for this guy to go back to that window, and I'll be able to get past him. But when you do get past him, do not go through that doorway immediately because there is a guy with a flashlight and he's looking in your direction. You can see the flashlight right there in the doorway. That's the guy you got to watch out for because he can see you. And once you get past him, you need to make your way over to the end of this corridor, and you need a smoke bomb and either a brick or a bottle. And what you need to do is you need to throw your smoke bomb at the two enemies that are near the doorway, and you need to mantle before it detonates, because what's going to happen is these enemies are going to see you, but they're not going to fully detect you, because of course I've stopped them from completing their grace period animation. And then once that happens, the enemies aren't fully in a combat status, so I need to use a brick or a bottle against that other guy and stun him, and then I need to get over the cover, get to the door as fast as possible before the enemies spot me, and I'll be fine. But that right there, I mean, Ether said it's very consistent and it works for him every single time, but I'm almost certain that's prone to error. But yeah, that whole entire sequence just then, like, you can just see from the way the corridor is laid out, like, if you just go to the middle of the arena, you have these cover points that lead to other cover points, and it seems like you're meant to move from cover to cover when the enemies are in specific spots, but it just doesn't work because of the way the enemies are positioned. So it's almost like they designed the environment in one way, but they didn't really take that into consideration when actually placing the enemies in that sequence. And so this is why I had to resort to the smoke bomb and either the brick or the bottle in order to bypass these enemies. And I also had to time my mantle animation so that when the enemies go into the grace period animation, they don't complete the animation, they get stunned by the smoke bomb, and therefore the enemies don't go into a combat status. And that is what allows me to not be shot immediately when I'm making my way over to this doorway. And that is how the sequence will go. And it's so dumb that it's designed this way. I really don't see how this is complementary to traditional stealth. I mean, if you've been crafting a lot of smoke bombs, then maybe that's what they're expecting you to do. And that's a correction I need to make from the previous Pittsburgh video. I said before that the smoke bombs on this game work like the stun bombs from The Last of Us Part 2, but that's not entirely accurate. I mean, you might as well attribute them to stun bombs because the smoke visibility effect from The Last of Us Remastered is there, but it's very buggy on this game. And furthermore, the actual visual effect of the smoke, it's not here on this game, but it's actually obscuring your vision. So for some reason, they didn't bother putting in a texture for the smoke cloud when it's actually created by the smoke bomb. So you don't know if you're in the smoke cloud or not, or if it's generated. It's just very bad that it's designed this way. And I don't understand how Naughty Dog could make this mistake with the smoke bombs on this game and how they could not put in a texture for the smoke cloud. and just make the actual mechanic very buggy on this game. So that's why I'm saying, even though the smoke bombs do have that visibility effect from The Last of Us Remastered, still treat it like it's the stun bomb from The Last of Us Part 2, because as much as this game will try to convince you that the smoke bombs on this game have the same visibility effect as The Last of Us Remastered, it really doesn't, and it's just the game lying like that. But that's what you gotta bear in mind when you're using smoke bombs on this game. But with this final encounter done, this is the end of my Last of Us Remake, grounded difficulty, no damage, no crafting, no upgrades, no safes, no Shiv doors walkthrough. Stay tuned for future projects. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.